Mr. Mingo refused to be part of this episode. He said he didn't want to sit here and talk about Pedro Rodrigues Filho, which is actually perfect, because for once I have the whole stage for myself. Except now you're here, so grab your tea and biscuits, because this story doesn't make any sense. A man connected to at least 70 murders later became a YouTuber telling young people, don't become criminals. And some people saw him as a monster. Others saw him as something almost impossible to understand. A criminal, a killer, and somehow a legend. The strangest part about Pedro Rodrigues Filho, it's not just what he did. It's what people turned him into. Because somewhere in between the crimes, the interviews, and the stories, a killer became a character. And people started asking a disturbing question. How can someone be feared by thousands and admired by others at the same time? So let's start at the end. March 5th, 2023, Mogi das Cruzes in São Paulo. A quiet street and a 60-year-old man sitting outside a relative's house. Nothing about the moment looked like the end of a legend. Then a black car arrived and a gunman stepped out and shot him to death. And then a man who spent decades deciding who deserved to die became someone else's victim. Before there was Pedrinho Matador, there was just Pedro, born in 1954 in Minas Gerais, Brazil. He grew up surrounded by extreme poverty and violence. His childhood was not just difficult, it was filled with extreme violence being treated as normal. According to Pedro's own account, his father was brutally abusive toward his mother. Stories about his birth even claim that his father kicked his pregnant mother so violently that Pedro was born with a skull injury. Little baby Pedro, how could you? And whether every detail is true or not, one thing is clear. Pedro grew up surrounded by violence before he even created it himself. This is where the story gets complicated, because thousands of people experience horrible childhoods, and they don't become killers. A painful past can explain someone's choices, obviously, but it does not remove responsibility for them. At 14 years old, Pedro committed his first murder. After his father lost his job at school over accusation of stealing food, Pedro blamed the people responsible, and he shot the deputy mayor. Then he killed a man he believed was actually responsible. And that moment reveals something important about Pedro. He didn't just use violence. He believed violence could fix things. In his mind, he wasn't creating chaos. He was correcting injustice. And that belief would follow him for the rest of his life. After moving to Sao Paulo, Pedro began targeting criminals, drug dealers, and gang members. People he believed deserved the punishment. That was when the nickname appeared, Pedrinho Matador. Then something happened that almost made his story feel human. He fell in love. Her name was Maria Presidio-Olympia, and people called her Bettina. She became pregnant, and for a moment, a man known for violence had something normal, something peaceful, and something to lose. Then all that disappeared. Maria was murdered by rivals, and Pedro responded the only way Pedro knew how, with more violence. He hunted down members of the gang responsible and killed them all. This is where people became conflicted because the emotion is understandable. Losing someone you love can create unbearable anger, but revenge has a dangerous problem. It never knows when to stop, and death creates another. Then another, until nobody remembers where it started. In 1973, Pedro was being transported in a police van. He was handcuffed next to another prisoner, and when the police opened the doors, the other inmate was dead. Pedro had strangled him. Then came prison, and strangely, prison didn't end his legend. It created it. Pedro spent decades behind bars, and many of his confirmed killings happened inside prison walls, a place where violence was already everywhere. Inside those prisons, some inmates feared him, others respected him, and some believed he punished people that justice system failed to punish. And this is the uncomfortable part. I understand why some people saw him that way, I really do. When people lose faith in the system, they start searching for someone who will do what the system cannot. Someone who delivers instant punishment, someone who doesn't wait, someone who doesn't ask for permission. That idea is terrifying. Because the moment someone decides, I know who deserves to die, they stop being justice and they become their own law. And Pedro was very good at creating that image. One of the most famous stories about him involved his father. Pedro claimed his father murdered his mother, and years later, Pedro supposedly went to prison, killed his father, and even cut out and ate his part of his heart. It is one of the darkest stories connected to him, and it helped build his legend. But according to journalist and biographer Julius Campbell, it never happened. Pedro did not kill his father. His father died years later in prison from an illness. And that might be one of the most fascinating things about Pedro. He wasn't only creating fear. He was creating a character. The unstoppable killer, the criminal with a code, and a man who became larger than reality. Then something impossible happened. After decades in prison, Pedro was eventually released. And instead of disappearing, he entered the public spotlight. He created a YouTube channel, he gave interviews, and he talked about crime. And he warned young people not to follow the path he took. Think about that. A man known around the world for murder, telling people to stay away from violence. A person connected to death, talking about the value of life. And that creates a question with no easy answer. Can someone who did terrible things ever become something different? Can society see the human being without forgetting the crimes? Because both things can't be true. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was shaped by violence, but he also chose violence. His childhood explains part of him. It does not excuse him. And in the end, his story came full circle. The man who survived decades in prison, the man who claimed he was the judge, the man who decided who deserved punishment, died as a victim. March 5th, 2023, a quiet street and a black car, gunshots, a legend ending like any other human life. So what was Pedro Rodrigues Filho? A monster? A victim? A vigilante? A murderer? Maybe. Just maybe. The uncomfortable answer is, he was a human being who became all of those things at different moments. And maybe that is why his story refuses to leave people's minds. Because the scariest part is not that monsters exist. The scariest part is how easily humans can convince themselves they are right. And that is the part that stays with me. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Love you, bye!